Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to MetalCon Live. It's really great to have you with us today. I'm Judy Geller, Director of MetalCon, and I'm here with Kaylin Burke, who's at the controls. Today, we are delighted to bring you Dave Burstein, Senior Principal from PSMJ Resources, and Ken Simonson, Chief Economist from the Associated General Contractor of America, to share the important trends in metal construction and design 2021 and beyond. Before we begin, I just have a couple things I'd like to bring you up to date on. I want you all to know that the 10 courses of the popular Metal Focused Safety Program are all now available on demand at metalcon.com. And also, I hope you'll mark your calendar for the next MetalCon Live on May 19th at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Our topic is a hot one. It's called Railless Solar on Metal Roofs, and it's presented by Shelley Higgins and Mark Geis, both from S5. And speaking of S5 is sponsoring MetalCon 2021's new Solar Center Exhibit Pavilion, where leading brands in solar components, performance monitoring systems, smart energy, and other solar solutions can showcase their products. For more information about how to exhibit in the Solar Center Exhibit Pavilion, that's a mouthful, just email info@metalcon.com. Finally, if you haven't been on the MetalCon website in a while, you should really check to see all that we've added. The education is now up, the workshops are live, registration and housing are open, and we are really looking forward to getting the industry back safely together in Tampa next October. Next week, we will be officially launching the exclusive Architects Experience, which is a show within a show at MetalCon. It is specifically for architects, designers, specifiers, and engineers who should have metal on their palette. And we've got an education program, a tour to the Salvador Dali Museum, special exhibits, networking, and a whole lot of fun planned for them. If you need technical help on today's webinar, reach out to MetalCon support in the chat box, and don't forget to complete the post-webinar survey to earn your AIA credits for today's session. And now I think that wraps up my spiel. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken and Dave. And Ken, I believe you're up first.
Thank you, Judy. It's good to be with you folks virtually, and I hope we'll be able to get together in person before long. What I want to show today is what's going on with construction costs, but also a little bit about the level of construction activity. So let me start by showing you a slide that will actually be updating on Friday of this week, which shows construction employment since the month before the pandemic hit. February 2020 was an all-time high for total non-farm payroll construction, and the highest since 2006 for both residential and non-residential construction. Residential comprises home builders, general contractors who specialize in multifamily construction, and specialty trade contractors, whether they're doing new home building or repairs and renovation and additions. And of course, all of that has been happening to a great extent. And then non-residential construction is the non-residential general contractors, the specialty trade contractors, and heavy and civil engineering contractors. They're shown by the blue and red lines respectively, and you can see that they both had these catastrophic decreases in employment in March and April of last year, and then a much stronger rebound than total non-farm employment shown by the green line. That hit in May when job sites opened up again. People started flocking to model homes or existing homes for sale and realizing that they really needed to remodel or add to their homes to accommodate work from home, study from home, and so forth. The residential side kept going right till the end of the year. It got back to the pre-pandemic level of February of 2020. But non-residential construction, after strong rebound in May, that was also assisted by a quick uptake of Paycheck Protection Program loans, it stalled out. No change from June through September, and then very sporadic halting increases, so that even as of March, non-residential construction firms had added back only 2/3 of the employees that they shed in those two disastrous months of March and April of last year. Here's how the picture looks state by state. You can see huge variation in the degree of recovery over the last 12 months. The leading states were Idaho and Utah. Not so coincidentally, they've also been leading in population growth. And then a scattering of states in medium to deep red having significant employment decline in construction employment. And this is residential and non-residential combined. The metro areas also a mix of real concentration, and the biggest losses are all areas associated with oil and gas production or processing, but the top gainers are spread around the country. In terms of construction spending, we got new data on Monday. The Census Bureau updates these figures with a lag of a month and a day on the first business day of each month. The top line here shows that in the first quarter of 2021, construction spending overall was up 5% compared to the first 3 months of 2020. So that sounds pretty positive. But as soon as you start peeling back the layers of that onion, you see huge changes, huge differences. Private residential construction, whether single family, multifamily, or improvements to existing, all up by strong double-digit amounts, overall up 21%. In contrast, private non-residential construction was down 10%, quite a steep drop in just 1 year. And public construction, which initially had been up, is now down a little bit. And I think this reflects the nature of this measure. It's called value put in place. So it's measuring projects that were already underway, in this case, the latest 3 months, but in many of those had been projects that started long before the pandemic. And as those finish up, they're not being replaced by equivalent number or size of projects. In fact, when you look down the list of non-residential categories, and here the public and private are combined, they're listed in descending order of the first quarter 2021 size. All of them are in red, that is declines, generally high single digits or even worse declines. Now, within some of those categories, there were a few bright spots. For instance, primary and secondary school construction was up. I think this was probably a combination of renovation to accommodate better spacing, improved HVAC systems, putting classrooms outside the main building. But on the higher ed side, you had this huge loss of students, of tuition, of student fees, and in some cases, student athletic revenue. And big question as to how many dorms or classrooms or other facilities are they going to need going forward. So higher spending is down, and I think will stay down, whereas primary and secondary school reconstruction will continue. And as we get more home building in areas not served by a school, we're going to see new schools built also. Similarly, in commercial construction, you have quite a dichotomy. Warehouse construction is up, and that's probably reflects building out of last mile or last hour distribution centers so that we can order it today and get it delivered today, of cold storage, and of big airport-based fulfillment centers. Retail construction has one of the most significant declines of any category, and I think that's likely to persist through this year also. Now, manufacturing construction is down pretty steeply, and all of the largest categories down, but this is gradually getting better. So it's somewhat the reverse of what you see for some of the other categories. We are starting to see new plant announcements. For instance, in the electronic category, both Intel and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing say that they're going to spend tens of billions of dollars in the next few years on building and equipping plants. So I do think that some of these categories are going to start getting better as those new projects get started. Transportation is an interesting mix. The airport side, you had some projects accelerate last year as passengers and aircraft disappeared and contractors were allowed into more parts of the airport for more hours. But once those projects finish, then you're being hit by a wave of airports that said, well, we're not sure when we're going to need to add those gates that we've been planning on. So I think airport construction will be down for a while. Freight rail and trucking up slightly, and those industries are doing well to the extent that they can get enough drivers and other employees. So I think that is going to stay in the black. And then mass transit is an illustration of one of these long lag time categories. You had projects that started several years ago, and as they finish up, I think there'll be a pause in new mass transit construction. One other thing to mention is office construction. Appears to be down only 4%, but this shows one of the anomalies or quirks of the census classification. These categories date from the 1960s, when long before there was such a thing as a data center. So data centers are included in this office figure. If we could break them out, I think you'd see that new office construction would be down much more steeply and is likely to stay that way. These categories also include renovation and repair and even repurposing. Again, if you look just at new construction, many of these would probably look somewhat worse. Now, lodging is not one of the largest categories, but I put it in because it does have the steepest decline of any of the ones that census breaks out. Well, what I really want to focus on now is what's been happening to construction costs and delivery times. The purple line here shows a producer price index that the Bureau of Labor Statistics posts every month that puts together all of the materials and services, and that would mostly be wholesaling, distributing services, transportation services that contractors buy for residential construction. And similarly, the red line has that for non-residential construction. And you can see these indexes went up at double-digit rates over the past 12 months, and in fact have accelerated ever since November. The increase through November was already significant compared to the near total lack of inflation that we'd had over the past few years, but now it has really taken off. Meanwhile, at the bottom, you see what I call a bid price index. The Bureau of Labor Statistics calls it the PPI for new non-residential building construction. And they create that by asking a fixed group of contractors every month, how much would you charge in terms of your overhead and profit to put up a particular building? And then they ask the same contractors month after month, and then aggregate those results to produce this index. And you can see that index stayed nearly completely flat up through January, just started ticking up a little bit in February and a little bit more in March, but it's only up 1.7% compared to 12% for the new non-residential construction index. So that means even contractors bidding a job today, they're not passing on what's happening on the materials and services that they buy. And ones who actually bid a job and had to guarantee a price back as recently as last summer, let alone a year ago, they've really been stuck by this ever widening gap between the cost of things that they're buying just today compared to the bid price they put in then. Well, here's some of the things that are driving those costs so high. These are producer price indexes for more specific categories. And again, the graph shows the change from March of last year to March of this year. Diesel fuel at the terminal level up 80%, lumber and plywood 63%, copper, steel mill products up 40% or more. And then plastic construction products supposedly up only 10%. But these data were actually collected around March 11th. So here we are on May 5th, almost 2 months later, and we've had nothing but price increase after price increase in all of these categories. So by the time the April PPI comes out in the middle of this month, these curves will be steeper, and even then they'll be out of date. And so this is a continuing and growing problem for contractors, both in terms of the steepness and the frequency of price increases and the breadth across the board. I'm hearing every day, getting copies of dear valued customer letters that AGC members are sending to me. And they keep mentioning new categories of products or inputs and longer delivery times or uncertain delivery times. How long will this last? Well, if I really knew that, I would be making a lot of money right now. But here's some evidence from the past. This graph shows the difference between the increase in materials costs and the increase in those bid prices, specifically for warehouses. That's the longest series we have on the bid price indexes. The periods in red, the color is chosen with malice aforethought. Those are the periods when contractors would be in the red, that is, having much higher increases in their input costs, materials, versus their bid prices. And so you can see from 2010 to 2012 and 2017 to 2019, periods lasted as long as 2 years where contractors were absorbing those increases. And that's pretty ominous, particularly for thinly capitalized subcontractors. AGC is trying to keep people informed about what's going on. We have put out, in fact, later this week, we'll have the second edition of a construction inflation alert that we posted in late March. I think if you use the same link, you'll find the more recent edition. But if not, you can email me and I'll show you that email address in a minute. We did a webinar a couple of weeks ago with myself and the executive director of Consensus Docs, that, in which he discusses ways of writing documents that provide some protection, and also the procurement director for a leading interior contractor. We're also trying to get the government to pay attention. There was an article on the front page of the New York Times yesterday that started with a contractor talking about how many of these price increase notices he's getting, and mentioned at the end that AGC has been trying to get the administration to remove the tariff on lumber. We're also part of the coalition fighting the tariffs on steel and aluminum. In terms of where we're headed, clearly the economy is rebounding very strongly, much more strongly than I or most economists believed possible a year ago. But there's still the risk that we will have a further setback with new variants of the coronavirus or some other unforeseen change in economic conditions. In any case, even if the economy keeps improving, construction is likely to lag. So many owners, investors, lenders, developers, institutions like universities and public agencies like airport authorities had big revenue losses, unanticipated expenditures, and a lot of uncertainty about future demand, or indeed they know the demand is gone or the business is closed. The best private prospects for now, I think, are in remodeling, local and cold storage distribution centers, data centers, and pretty soon restaurants. That while a lot of restaurants have closed, we all have quite an appetite, pun intended, for going out to eat again. And so I think we'll see more restaurants open. Not true for retail or offices or hotels or for higher ed facilities for quite a while. And on the public side, I do think that K through 12 schools will keep doing well, as I mentioned. We've also seen water and sewer hold up better. People continue to pay those bills. There's still a lot of mandates to clean up their act, to improve the level of treatment. And also, as you get more subdivisions, you get more line extensions, and in some cases, plant spending. This doesn't take into account what the administration might get through Congress in terms of infrastructure spending, however you define infrastructure. But I really think that that's a story for beyond the next 6 to 12 months. It will take a long time before that money gets down to the level of contractors actually putting things into the ground or up above the ground. But for the longer term, I think we can discern some things that are going to be with us. Population growth keeps slowing down. Yesterday, the Centers for Disease Control reported a very substantial drop in the birth rate. The number of births was the lowest since before the baby boom began 70 years ago. And I think that in terms of a birth rate, it's at an all-time low. We also had a big bump up in deaths. Hopefully that is not going to be repeated, but nevertheless, population growth keeps slowing. And that means slower growth in demand for most types of construction, obviously for housing after we get through the current surge of demand, but also for related infrastructure, retail, schools, and other public buildings, and also slower growth of revenue for local governments to finance construction. The shift to e-commerce certainly is permanent. The nature and location of those structures is going to keep changing as we see more and more automation inside the buildings and autonomous vehicles, drones, and robots out making deliveries either to them or to the customers. And then healthcare, we've seen a lot of movement out of hospitals and into specialized care facilities. That's also going to continue. Manufacturing will keep evolving, and so will energy generation. So I think that there are some opportunities there that will emerge and get much greater over the years. But for now, it's going to be slow starting. So let me finish by showing you a map of where population change has been occurring. This is not based on the decennial census figures that came out last week, but on an annual estimate the Census Bureau posts each December based on their estimate of births, deaths from those kinds of records, and also of migration, international and state to state. What's noteworthy about this is first, population growth slowed to 1/3%. That was the slowest rate since the Great Depression. 16 states, an all-time high, lost population. Those are the ones in deep red. And for the first time in the 120 years of these estimates, probably the first time since California became a state in 1850, it lost population. And that helped fuel the extreme growth in population, well, not extreme by historic standards, but the leading growth in those mountain states that are in deep and medium green, as well as growth in the Southeast and Texas. And I think these trends are likely to continue for at least a few more years. Well, that's it for me. I just want to encourage people, if they're interested, to sign up for the Data Digest. It's a free weekly one-page summary of economic news relevant to construction. You can email me at ken.simonson@agc.org to get that, and go to our website, agc.org, to see a variety of other economic and other information. So let me turn it now to the folks at PSM&J.
Thank you very much, Ken. And that was a great presentation on what's happening in the construction industry. I'd like to kind of move upstream a little bit. So let me load up my slides and tell you about what's happening in the design industry. So what I want to look at is what things are going to look like beyond the pandemic and in whatever the new normal turns out to be. And I'm going to give you some predictions that we've got on the future of various metal construction markets. First, starting with a big picture, and then I want to get into specific markets and sub-markets within that, and especially focusing on the markets that use lots of metal construction. I'll give you a few recommendations, and then we'll go ahead and answer all the questions that have accumulated. So every quarter since 2003, PSM&J conducts what we call our quarterly market survey. This is strictly for architect and engineering firms. We're looking at what happens on the design side, and it occurs in all the months that are shown in yellow here. We do the survey as a free service to the industry. We restrict input to the A&E side, not so much the construction side, because the A&E, as I'm going to show in a minute, really leads that. And it's a pretty robust survey. We get hundreds of people that respond to these every quarter. We use that data to chart what we call a plus-minus index. And let me just show you how that plus-minus index works so you'll understand the graphs that I'm about to show you. Let's say there's a sample question. One of the questions we have are proposal opportunities. Again, this is for architect and engineering firms, for design firms. Are proposal opportunities in the hotel and motel sector increasing or decreasing compared to last quarter? So that's a question, and people either say it's increasing, it's decreasing, or it's about the same. So here's an example. Let's say that 185 people answered this particular question. And let's say that 60 of them said, we're seeing more proposal opportunities this quarter than last quarter. So we count that as plus 1 point, that's plus 60. And let's say another 80 of the participants said that it's about the same. We don't really see a major change one way or the other. That's 0 points. And then the remaining 45, they say we're having fewer proposal opportunities this quarter than last quarter. That's minus 1 point. Take all those, add them all up, you get plus 15. Take that 15 divided by the 185 people who answered this question. That gives us an index of plus 8%. Some people get a little bit confused about these percentages. They're not percent growth, it's just an index. So if everybody saw an increase, the index would be plus 100%. If everybody saw a decrease, the index would be minus 100%. And if the same number of people see an increase as a decrease, then it would be exactly 0. So anything above 0 means that overall people are seeing an increase. Anything below 0 means that they're seeing a decrease. And I'm going to show you some graphs, just keep that in mind. So before I jump into that and show you our data, let's do a little quick poll here and see what you think. How did A&E proposal opportunities overall look in the first quarter of 2021? Much worse, a bit worse, about the same, bit better, or a lot better? Let's see what everybody thinks. All right, so we've got about a third of the people that are voting. Just go ahead and click on whichever one you think is the right one. So we've closed it, and it looks like, oh, wait, did you close it? What happened? Are you launching it again, Kaylin, or you did close it? Okay, I guess we're launching it again. Okay, got closed prematurely, so we're gonna try it again here. So let's see what everybody thinks. Certainly, I'll just give you a little spoiler alert. Much worse than last year does not seem to be a very popular response, but some of the others all have some responses. So I think we've got enough here. Go ahead and close it, Kim. So the biggest bar looks like kind of a normal distribution here, except for the much worse category. Most of the people, 42%, said that about the same proposal activity this year as last year. Almost as many said a bit better, and then a few said a bit worse and a lot better. So let's take a look at the actual data. So we've got this all the way back to 2012, the last 10 years or so. And you can see this is quarter by quarter. This blue line is the 0 line. So anything above the blue line means that we are, each quarter was above the previous quarter. And if we'd have gone back to 2007, 2008, you'd see a whole bunch of data points below the blue line. But since 2012, in fact, it's been increasing every quarter. What's interesting is starting in about 2017, the rate of increase kind of slowed down. And then when we hit the pandemic, it actually went down to just about 0 and bounced around there. But look what's happened in the last quarter. After 3 quarters of bouncing around 0, proposal opportunities for design firms just absolutely took off in Q1, one of our highest numbers ever. If we break it down by region, you can see that these are the plus minus index for each region, and you can see that they're all really, really strong. It doesn't always look this way. Sometimes one region is doing well, another region is doing poorly. Right now, every region is doing well. We drill down a lot more, and in our report, which we produce every quarter, in fact, by signing on to this webinar, we will send you a complimentary copy of that report. We actually show the data for every one of these major sectors in bold and the subsectors in the bullets. Excuse me a second. And what I've done here is I've highlighted sectors here, major sectors that tend to have a lot of metal construction. I haven't got them all because, for example, in transportation, most of these subsectors here don't have a lot of the kind of metal construction that you're probably used to. Some do, rail and airports, but for the most part, they don't. So I've just included some of the other ones. But again, in the report, we've got all this data in much more detail. So let's start with commercial markets. And this is the overall situation for commercial markets. You can see that here's the zero line right here. And you can see that in the first quarter, it went from a plus 26% index to a minus 47% index. What happened in the first quarter of last year? Pandemic. Everything got shut down. And look at what happened quarter over quarter. The next quarter, minus 37, minus 31, minus 29. Remember, these are negative compared to the prior quarter. So this meant that that's 37% of the people responding thought it was worse in Q2 than it was in Q1, even worse in Q3 than in Q2, even worse in Q4 than Q3. And then all of a sudden, boom, back up to a plus 36. So you can see a big change in the overall commercial markets. If you look at it geographically, what you can see is there's a little bit of variability here. Interestingly enough, the Northeast actually seemed to be the strongest, and the mountain regions seemed to be the weakest. But overall, they were all positive. So that's a big, big turnaround. We also looked at the different submarkets here, and comparing last quarter with this quarter, the red frowny faces are bad, the green smiley faces are good, and the yellow neutral faces are just kind of neutral. And so you can see last quarter, this is Q4 of last year, almost everything was red. The only thing that was good, and this is something that Ken mentioned too, was warehouse distribution facilities. They were positive. They're still positive. The rest of things are still negative. The one that's changed, interestingly enough, is retail buildings. Went from being really negative to actually being neutral. And overall, even though the colors didn't change, they got somewhat less negative. And the warehouse distribution got really, really positive. And Ken mentioned about separating call centers and data facilities. In our survey, we actually do that. We separate call centers and data facilities from retail buildings. The next one is the education market. This includes all kinds of education, public schools, private schools, K-12, higher ed, and everything. I'll show you the breakdown in a minute. Again, let's take a look at it. You could see that pre-recession, there was a lot of positive numbers. And again, here's the zero line. So what happened in Q1? The pandemic hit, and look at these negative numbers. Again, really, really deeply negative, quarter after quarter after quarter until Q1, when it shot up again to a plus 26, which is a fairly strong plus number. A little bit more variability here by region. In fact, the mountain region was actually down, but the other regions were all up, Midwest being the strongest, but overall, not too bad for most regions except the mountain region. If we look at the submarkets, you can see a big change here. The K-12 market went from being bad to being good all in one quarter, and that's pretty unusual. Higher ed continued to be bad, and I think the reason for this, and I agree with Ken's assessment, is that higher education is probably going to be bad for a while. During the last 10 years, there was a huge capital expenditure boom in higher education. Everybody wanted to put up, fancy new dorms and new classroom facilities. I think a lot of that was driven by the U.S. News and World Report ranking, which puts a lot of emphasis on physical facilities. And so tuitions as a result just kept going up and up and up. And I think people are finally saying that's enough. We can't afford to pay any more tuition. The states are saying that's enough. We can't afford to keep putting more money into higher education. So I really think that higher education is going to be down for a while. Laboratories, support facilities, they actually got better. They went from being negative to being neutral. We look at other government buildings. This is everything from courthouses to libraries, all kinds of state, federal, and local government buildings. And you can see a similar pattern to what we had on the schools, but not quite as negative. It went from a plus 40 And then during the pandemic, when shut down, you can see we had several quarters of negative numbers, but they weren't hugely negative like in some of the previous graphs that I just showed. But again, Q1, very positive. And what we see here is we see a significant amount of variation here. We see the South, Midwest being strong. We see the Southwest and the Mountain not being very strong. And when we look at the submarkets, what we can see here is justice facilities, courthouses, the jails, those kinds of things. Well, no, I guess actually jails are in public safety, but courthouses, those kinds of things went from negative to positive in one quarter. Public safety went from neutral to positive. Public recreation went from negative to positive. The only one that stayed negative was sports facilities, which still haven't really come back yet. But you can see 3 out of the 4 submarkets in this category are all positive now. When we look at the light industrial market, again, very similar pattern, but not that negative. It went from when the pandemic hit from a plus 25 index to a minus 5. The next quarter, it went to 0. The next quarter was actually positive. So even last year, we were seeing positive growth in the light industrial market. And in Q1, it's way positive. In fact, this is as high as we've ever recorded in this market. If we look at it from a geographic standpoint, you can see it's pretty uniform. And if we look at it from the standpoint of submarkets, they're all good. Every submarket is positive here. So the light industrial is a really strong market. Looking at healthcare, interestingly enough, healthcare never went negative. Even when things got shut down, of course, there was a lot of demand for healthcare then, and it went down to plus 10. But remember, even though this is dropping, any plus number here means that there's more proposal opportunities this quarter than there were in the prior quarter, and it's actually accelerated since then. And if you look at it regionally, again, all the regions are good. The West and the Midwest are particularly good. The Northeast maybe not quite as good, but all pretty strong. And then if we look at the submarkets here, we saw strong proposal opportunities in all of these different submarkets. Housing market, when we look at that, again, it did go negative during the shutdown, but it recovered really quickly. There was only 1 quarter of negative readings. It went up to a slightly positive in Q2, and then it's just accelerated since then. Looking at it regionally, you can see this is really strong. I mean, every single region is really strong. And if you look at all the submarkets, they're really strong too. And this is particularly an important market. In fact, of all these markets, the one that I look at as kind of the bellwether is this one right here, single family development subdivisions. Because when people are building subdivisions, they're going to be building roads, they're going to be building water systems, they're going to be building libraries, they're going to be building schools, they're going to be building courthouses, they're going to be building bridges. All kinds of construction work is going to eventually be driven when people keep building subdivisions. So the good news here is all these markets, including the single family development subdivision market, really strong. There may be an opportunity here. Ken talked about pricing, and I just kind of picked a couple of things while we're talking about housing, especially. Look what's happened to lumber prices. I mean, since here in early 2020 until now, look what's happened. Lumber prices have more than doubled. When you look at steel prices, metal, rebar and USD and the US dollar index, they've gone up too, but they haven't gone up nearly as much as lumber prices. And so traditionally, in America at least, homes are built of lumber. But I know a lot of the metal fabrication and construction people here have been really pushing the idea of substituting metal framing instead of lumber framing. And it looks like there may be an opportunity here from a cost standpoint to really capture some of the very hot residential market. So here are some of our summaries here. It's markets to pursue. Definitely warehouse and distribution facilities. We see that being good for a long time. Light industrial facility. Oh, and by the way, just a little preamble on this. What I've shown you is proposal activities in the architecture and engineering market. If you look at construction, these are going to show you what's probably going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years in construction because of the normal lag between design and construction. So warehouse and distribution facilities, light industrial, K-12, and I think perhaps community college. And the reason I'm pointing this out as an exception to the downtrend in four-year colleges is that at least the current administration is putting a lot of emphasis and trying to get a lot of federal funding to make community colleges essentially like high school, where everybody goes to a 2-year college instead of having public school being K through 12. Public school is going to be pre-K through 14. At least that's what the Biden administration would like to see. We'll see if that actually happens. If it does, and if that actually gets funded, then I think we can see a real bifurcation between a hot community college market and what will probably continue to be a cold market for four-year universities. Government buildings, again, a lot of that's going to depend on the feds, but even so, it looks pretty good. Healthcare, housing, those things look good no matter what. Some markets probably not that great. Ken mentioned commercial markets. Retail especially is probably not going to be strong. We're going to continue to have people delivering in Amazon trucks instead of people driving to the mall. Higher education, we talked about. Sports facilities, probably not. There was a huge boom in sports facilities. I think most cities are pretty well taken care of. So with that, Galen, you got any questions for us?
Hey there, guys. So we do have one question, and Dave, this is specifically for you regarding your slides, and I think everyone could use just a slight clarification on them. So in the responses for Q1, is it compared to Q4 of 2020, or is it compared to Q1 of 2020?
That's a great question. Yeah, all of these are compared to the prior quarter, not the prior year. In fact, yeah, thanks for that clarification. When you look at this, what we show you here is the year end. Each of these data points actually is the year end to take the seasonality out of it. And then we've blown up the last few quarters to show it on a quarter by quarter basis. So yeah, each of these percentages actually versus the prior quarter, not the prior year. Thank you for that question. Good one.
Fantastic. So if there are any questions, please feel free, everyone, to submit them in the Q&A section. We are happy to take any questions, but I'll let you guys continue on chatting for you.
Yeah, well, Dave and I did not coordinate our presentations, but I thought it was fascinating, the many points of agreement we had, but also some where we do see things differently. I would love to hear from members of the audience what they're experiencing in terms of planning, delivery times, whether any owners are saying, wait a minute, these costs are out of sight, or the project will take too long to finish, so we're going to hold off. Are you seeing any cancellations? And Dave, maybe you have some perspective on this, of people who either because of the delay in getting materials, getting projects finished, even when materials get to the job site, the contractor may not have all of their workforce back, or they find the subs have some key employee who is ill or has to take care of a family member who is ill or not able to go back to school or daycare. So I think there are just a lot of bottlenecks that weren't there a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, some of the people in the audience can probably provide good perspective. Kaylin, can people raise their hand and you take them off of mute and they can just tell us what they're saying?
Absolutely. Go ahead and raise your hand to come off of mute. I'll let you guys come off of mute as you join, or you can send it to us in the chat. I do have one independent individual named Mark Ellis. He said that he's expecting a large boom in commercial in the Northern California area and Silicon Valley.
That's interesting to me because, of course, we've heard of all of these people who no longer are tied to an office and Those who can't afford the housing or don't want to put up with the congestion, they're moving out of state, or at least moving up to Lake Tahoe and through the Sierra Nevada area. Sacramento had the largest increase in construction employment of any metro area in the latest 12 months. We ranked 358 metros each month by change over the past year in both number and percent. And Sacramento has just been booming, whereas the coastal areas not so much. But I am concerned that we are going to continue to have these supply chain bottlenecks. They may move. For instance, a month ago, there were said to be 40 ships waiting to unload outside Long Beach and Los Angeles. That number came down, but it turns out the containers just got stacked higher and higher at the port because there wasn't enough rail service to get all the containers moved inland. So the rail delays went from 1 to 2 days to 11 days. And then you get to a rail terminal, you may not have a truck driver because that person is, again, either out of the business or they've switched from hauling containers and full trailers to delivering packages to people's homes.
Yeah, that's Kaylin, anybody else raise their hand on that one?
Yes, so I am actually seeing one individual is experiencing or has experienced a 25% forced overrun on a building in a destructed and finished in August of 2020. So Raymond, if you want to come off of mute, please just raise your hand and I'll let you have some time with these two guys. Yeah, and then I'm getting a few other questions regarding the raw materials. So do you consider that a raw materials boom will create a bubble in the near future? And how will that affect construction going forward?
I think that there are going to be, as I've said a couple times, these continuing difficulties, and it does seem new ones keep emerging. For instance, the big freeze in Texas in February damaged all of the plants that produce plastic ingredients for construction, resins and so forth. And so that has led to depletion of the inventories, if there were any, of things like PVC pipe, of vinyl siding and vapor barriers, of the resins that hold together the layers of engineered wood like oriented strand board and plywood, and many other problems. And so I think these may cascade for a while before those kinds of plants catch up. Something we're reading about every day economy-wide, semiconductors, that to the extent the semiconductor manufacturers give more to the automakers, there's going to be less to go into construction equipment, into those smart tools and other things that are part of the Internet of Things. So it's going to be a bumpy ride. So I'm not sure I'd use a bubble, but a lot of unexpected things that may hold up final completion of buildings.
Understood. Very cool. So we have another question that came through, and it's, will panelization or modular construction play a major role in the residential construction resurgence?
Dave, you have an opinion on that one?
You know, people, I think it's one of those things that they talk about where it happens gradually and then suddenly. And I think right now, if you look back, modular construction and that sort of thing has been happening gradually over the years. And I think there's at some point going to be a tipping point where it just changes. And the tipping point may be driven by this enormous increase in lumber prices. I don't know if that increase is going to last or not, but I just have a feeling that we are going to see a fundamental shift in the way that these buildings are built.
Well, I've been with AGC for almost 20 years, and I've been hearing about panelization or modularization for almost that long, and it never seems to arrive. Yes, you get examples of it, and I think it has become much more common in, say, limited service hotels, in student housing, in correctional facilities, maybe in senior housing. But there's still an awful lot of barriers. And so I'm not sure we're going to see that breakthrough.
Yeah, it's going to take an external force. And, I talked about, possibly lumber prices could be that force. Another possibility too is, there's a growing labor shortage of field construction people. And so the traditional field construction methods may simply not be viable when you just simply can't find people to do the work, which would make factory built construction a little bit more viable because it's a little bit less labor intensive. So we'll see. It's been very gradual. It's one of those things that everybody says is imminent, and it's always imminent. But it might happen. I would not be surprised.
Absolutely. So I do have a few other questions coming through now, which is fantastic. So I have that clients are not canceling, but they are prioritizing the scope of future phases, and uncertainty of skyrocketing prices is scaring everyone. How do you think that they should address the current skyrocketing prices? And do you anticipate wood and plywood prices coming down later on this year, or at what point in time in the future do you anticipate them coming back down?
Well, people think I have a crystal ball, but I haven't been able to read it clearly for a long time. I do try to read what people who are much closer to specific markets say, and there seems to be a consensus that the lumber market is going to remain tight for quite a while. So obviously, you always get a difference of opinion about how long and how much prices will go up, but there seems to be little disagreement that they're going to stay high. We're not going to get back to pre-pandemic prices. We're not even going to get back to what was then the record last September for quite a while. So that's as far as I'll stick my neck out there. And it's a similar story on steel. It's interesting that there are a variety of indexes for both, but for both lumber and steel, the indexes that are widely quoted had never gone above 1,000. Well, in the last few weeks, they've been jockeying for which one will hit 1,300, 1,400, 1,500 first. They each keep going up more and more. And again, the predictions are that they're going to stay very elevated. Yes, there is supposedly some more capacity coming online in both terms of sawmills and steel mills, but we have to see if it really does ramp up enough to put a dent in that supply. So we think that the fastest way to increase supply would be to take off those tariffs that are making foreign product uncompetitive, but we haven't seen any sign that the current administration is willing to reverse the tariffs the last administration put in. So I think we're going to be living with this for quite a while.
To comment on the tariffs, I have another question regarding them. So what do you, or what can we do as individuals or companies to counter the tariffs that are impacting our materials and material costs? Particularly, this individual is interested in the aluminum material cost.
I'm part of a coalition called the Tariff Reform Coalition. We met a week ago virtually with senior Commerce Department officials. They're very interested in hearing whether the exclusion process that was put in place for circumventing the tariffs, that there are a couple of categories of tariffs, but they specifically allowed people to request an exclusion from a tariff if they could demonstrate that a product was not available here in the US. And they want to know how many construction firms were able to make use of that, or let's say suppliers for construction were able to, did file for those exclusions, and what was the outcome? Did they get denied? If they were denied, what did they do instead? So if people have any detailed information like that, I'd certainly like to hear it. My own view is that we aren't going to be able to turn to foreign sources very soon for steel or aluminum, unfortunately. But there may be specific examples if you're looking for a particular product or part that isn't available in the US.
Okay. And we do have some more questions regarding that as well. So should we start to use brick and concrete in design instead of lumber to help lower the cost or address the cost increases?
Oh, that's always a challenge. It's obviously very project specific in terms of what alternative supply is available to you. Brick and concrete don't move very far compared to lumber shipments for the most part. And unfortunately, just yesterday, I heard I got these dear valued customer letters announcing cement price increases coming up. They give more lead time than the steel guys or the lumber guys, but price increases that two cement makers say they're going to be putting in place this summer. So that would presumably filter through to any concrete product also. And then fuel costs, both for trucking, fuel surcharges seem to be coming back, and the cost of making cement or concrete products or brick products. Obviously, a lot of energy goes into those. So it's really hard to predict that you won't be jumping from the proverbial frying pan into the fire if you make that kind of change. One last example, big shortage now, as I mentioned, of PVC pipe, both because of the supply shutdowns and so all those burst water pipes in Texas having to be replaced. So somebody said that for some applications, they're looking at using ductile iron pipe instead, but of course that depends on steel pricing in part. So those prices, this is the same person said they just gotten a notice of a 23% increase on ductile iron pipe.
Wow.
So no sure way to get around these price increases or shortages or delivery delays.
Ouch. So to switch things up, someone is asking about technology. So have you seen the use of robots in construction, and has that increased? Do you anticipate that increasing over the next several quarters to full year?
What do you say, Dave? Do you see that happening?
You know, we see these sporadic reports of, 3D printed houses and, these kinds of things, but so far they're very, very anecdotal. And, I haven't seen anything that comes close to scale on those kinds of things.
Agreed. I think there have been some incremental improvements. In fact, there have been real breakthroughs earlier on. I went to a demonstration of interior spotting of where you hung fixtures for lighting or sprinklers and so forth. It used to take two people, one up on a scissors lift and a plumb bob, and the other person leafing through hundreds of pages of documents. And they were replaced by one person using GPS and later pointing to hit those spots. And that one person was able to do twice as many square feet in an interior space in one day as the crew of two had. So that was a fourfold improvement in productivity. Not the same as robotics, but certainly a way that technology is changing and helping with construction. I think, again, an impediment to going to that making things on the spot is you need resins to do that. And right now, those are in very short supply. Or you need powdered metal.
Yeah, I guess the one area that I was just thinking about that we have seen significant improvement in the use of robotics and those kind of technologies has been in surveying. It used to be that survey crews were always 3 or 4 people. Now it's not unusual to see a one-person survey crew.
Very interesting. So I'm going to have a last call for final questions. If I don't receive any in the next few seconds, we're going to end it. I'm not seeing any additional questions coming through. So I will take this moment to thank both of you, Dave and Ken, for joining us today. As a reminder to everyone, this entire presentation will be available immediately following this. Please hold off for about 24 hours just so we can get it all transferred over to our YouTube page. And we so appreciate everyone's time joining us today. As a reminder, you can get your AIA LU credits just by submitting the survey that you're going to receive immediately following this presentation. Again, Ken and Dave, thank you so much for all of your insight today. We so appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you all in the very near future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.